Because there's a whole lot of illusions about Africa's relationship with other people in the world. There's a whole lot of illusion about our relationship to the religions in the world. And these belief systems that had its origin in Africa, all of them, and there is no exception, turned on African people. I said there is no exception. And there's one thing you have to get through your mind and keep it. Nothing that ever came from the European mind was meant to do anything but facilitate European domination of the world. And I said there's no exception.
Now, in the 1450s, this period was over. And fortunately for Europe and unfortunately for Africa, some of the maps that the Jewish gold dealers had used to go down into the western Sudan and along the coast of West Africa fell into the hands of a man called Henry the Navigator. Now there's no proof that Henry ever went to sea, but the one thing he did which helped Europe in its expansion was to start schools to train people in navigational sciences. But most of the information in navigational science and marine engineering came out of the advanced technology then coming out of China. And it was with this technology Europe used to unlock itself. Now, one of the main reasons why most of the maps were made by Jewish gold dealers, it is because some of the Jews in Spain had come from North Africa and they could handle Indo-African languages. And their relationship with the people in Inner Africa was very good and had been very good for years, even the years after the dispute the Jews had with Rome.
It was released earlier today. It says that in 2022, at least 435 tons of gold was smuggled out of Africa. 435 tons. That's more than 1 ton of gold every day. Do you know how much 435 tons of gold are worth? About $31 billion at today's rates. It's enough to wipe out the national debt of some of these African countries, but that much gold was illegally smuggled out of the continent in 2022. And this has been a growing trend. The amount of gold smuggled out of Africa doubled between 2012 and 2022. And where was it smuggled to? Reports say that the lion's share of the gold, about 47% of it, made its way to the United Arab Emirates, where it was reprocessed, rebranded, and reintroduced into the global gold supply. Our next report has the details.
In 2022, the UAE was the world's third largest exporter of gold. The country exported gold worth $32.8 billion. All this without a single gold mine in the Emirati territory. So how did they export so much? Well, because they imported a lot more. Officially, $57.1 billion worth of gold. So it's a massive operation, where gold worth billions is imported, processed, and then exported. The operation is so big that tracing some smuggled gold in that mix would be almost impossible. But the group called Swissaid has done just that. They went through the numbers and made an astonishing claim that the UAE has been buying gold smuggled from Africa. So how does this work? The gold is smuggled. It gets refined and then the UAE exports it in Emirati packaging. The global gold market doesn't care about where the gold is from as far as importers are concerned. The gold has become Emirati. Its backstory is of no interest to the market. In 2022, about 435 tons of gold were smuggled out of Africa. That is gold worth about $35 billion today. Smuggled gold means no taxes or tariffs, so it doesn't benefit the African nation's development. Most of the smuggled gold came from artisanal mining where people mine the gold instead of corporations. Now you could think artisanal mining sounds like a good thing. A way for the average person to benefit from a nation's resources. But it's not that ideal. These are small-scale, unregulated mines prone to accidents and deaths, and you also have artisanal mines operated by militant groups. They enslave innocents, force them to work in the artisanal gold mines. Then they sell the gold to buy weapons, and use those weapons to perpetuate the vicious cycle. This is prevalent in the Democratic Republic of Congo. In the war-torn East where numerous groups vie for control. It's also common in Sudan, the country currently being torn apart by civil war. One of the warring factions is a paramilitary group known as the Rapid Support Forces. For all intents and purposes, the RSF is a private army, controlled by this man, Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, also known as Hemeti. How does Hemeti pay his private army? With the proceeds from the gold mines he controls. All this gold could have been used to fuel Africa's growth, help the world's youngest continent progress. But instead, it is getting smuggled away. The common people aren't benefiting from Africa's vast resources. They are being used by warlords and militant groups to fund their own agendas. Africa deserves better.
Because there's a whole lot of illusions about Africa's relationship with other people in the world. There's a whole lot of illusion about our relationship to the religions in the world. And these belief systems that had its origin in Africa, all of them, and there is no exception, turned on African people. I said there is no exception. And there's one thing you have to get through your mind and keep it. Nothing that ever came from the European mind was meant to do anything but facilitate European domination of the world. And I said there's no exception. Everything that was brought into this continent, everything, every idea, every so-called religion was meant to dominate and to control. The Arabs had no illusions about it. The Europeans had no illusions about it. You were the ones with the illusions. And yet every element that went into the making of every major religion in the world started in Africa. Why is it that you are so naive? You let people redress something that you invented, sell it back to you, and enslave you through it. I'm saying that all organized present religion exception. Why I wanted to be here earlier, I wanted to deal with our relationship with the people of the world and the fact that we created peaceful nations that had no word for jail because no one had ever gone to one. No word for old people's home because no one ever threw away grandma and grandpa. No word for orphanages. We did all of this, and over half of human civilization was over before we knew that a European was in the world. Before he wore a shoe or lived in a house that had a window. Now Africa has always and still is the prize for the whole world. We as a people have always been the world's richest people, culturally rich, mineral rich. We have always been the prize because we have always had and still have something that other people won't, think they can't do without, and don't care to pay for. Because we have always been the prize, we have been under siege for over 3,000 years. Nothing that ever brought into Africa from the outside was meant to do the African any good. That means all other religions. Islam was the handmaiden of Arab imperialism. Christianity was the handmaiden of European imperialism. The Hebrew faith was the handmaiden of a concept called the chosen people. Now, if God is kind and God is merciful and God has no stepchildren, he won't choose one over the other. And to say he chose some people, you're making him a bigot. And to say that he endorsed enslavement of one people over the other, you're making him an accessory to murder. The Arabs used Islam to rationalize their slavery and their imperialism. The Europeans used Christianity to rationalize their slavery and imperialism. Who are you kidding about friends in the world? Damn it, if you want a friend, look in the mirror. There's 1 billion African people on the face of this earth. Why are you buying third-rate junk from third-rate people thinking you can't make it? Why don't you at least make a safety pin to hold your child's diaper together?
Teach.
Who has programmed your mind into thinking you can't make a car? The first man that made a car that had never seen one previously. The Japanese bought cars, bought locomotives, broke them down and studied them, and had a Japanese technician produce each piece, put it together, and had a much better train than the one they copied from. All knowledge in the world belongs to everybody in the world.
Yes.
Who has programmed our mind in assuming that we cannot run a nation and run it well? The main thing imperialism did, slavery and imperialism, that they removed African people from the respectful commentary of history. And they tell them, something they are still telling them, and all of the organized religions are guilty of this. I favor none of it because Africa didn't need any of it. I'm saying that African belief systems, properly understood, is 10 times better than Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And better for the African. So you might have some romance with one of these religions. I have no romance with any of them. I have a romance with reality and truth. And the chips can fall where they may after I tell it. As for friends, you have had no friends. When they discovered you, they began to prey on you. Now let's look at our relationship with Western Asia, mistakenly called the Middle East. For 3,000 years, our greatest enemies came from Western Asia. They were trying to avenge the fact that they were once African colonies. You read a book called When Egypt Ruled the East, and you get some of the basic information on this. Now, the first visitors to Africa came in the 1700s BC. These were the people who would later be called Hebrews. Now, black people are ticklish on this because black people think that everything in the Bible is true. I question the intelligence of anyone who thinks everything in the Bible is true or supposed to be true. It's allegory, stories told to illustrate a point at a time when there were very few people reading books. And most of what went into the making of the Bible was copied from Egyptian texts. Now, if you want to get so dewy-eyed over the Bible, which is a carbon copy of a carbon copy, why don't you go back and read the original Egyptian text? Then you see where all these stories started from. You see where the story of the Exodus started from. Now, you get so dewy-eyed, you actually think there was an Exodus. These people walked into Africa. Why couldn't they walk out? Why did they have to go by sea? No. Why did they see at the park? If you read Egyptian literature, you will discover that the whole story of somebody parting the sea started with about 3,000 years before the Hebrew entrance. I should not use the word Hebrew entrance, but the entrance from Western Asia. Now let's get one thing straight, because black people are confused about all religions. Now, I'm not against any religion. I'm a very spiritual human being. I just don't need a preacher to preach no 10 commandments. To be intelligent enough to pick from the 10 commandments. We were not commandments anyway, but they were omissions of purity at the great school at Luxor, the great African training school. All right, now, let's get into this Western Asia. I'm saying that the people who came from Western Asia escaping famine did not have any Hebrew faith when they came into Africa. And there's no record of a Hebrew faith before theirs. Why is it that when they left Africa in the so-called Exodus, they had all three? African culture, an African religion, and an African language. Now look at the origin of the so-called people you now refer to as Jews. And you're mistaken using that reference because the word Jew is of European origin. And the people in Europe who call themselves by their name have no relationship to the biblical people of the Hebrew faith. And I'm saying that the people we now call Jews entered world history with their visit to Africa. And when Africa was invaded, 1675 BC, instead of joining the Africans who had been their beneficiary and saved them from starvation, they joined the enemies of Africa. No one has ever returned any favors to us. As a people, we have always been hospitable to strangers, mostly the wrong strangers. And what we have to understand now, in the period of superior brainwashing, is there is no European answer for African problems. Either Africans find a solution to African problems or there is no solution, and if you don't find a solution soon, you go back into slavery. We have to stop all of this nonsense about who belongs to what religion when all of them were imposed on us in the first place. We stop all this fight between Muslims and Christians when neither one of the religions are doing them any good or moving them toward independence. All of them are handmaids of conquerors. All of them are religions of conquerors. We were naive when we accepted their interpretation of something that we had all along. I'm saying we need to take a good look at ourselves. I'm not talking about burning churches. I'm not talking about getting rid of religions. Understand me well. I am saying that every single thing that touches your life, religious, socially, and politically, must be an instrument of your liberation, or you must throw it into the ash can of history.
Please consider supporting us by clicking on the like and subscribe buttons. Your support will be greatly appreciated.